So I'm going to ask you guys to think about something. So I talked to a friend of mine the other day. He's a very, very smart guy, and we've been talking about, well, all the sorts of things that we've been talking about tonight for a long time. And we were talking about the relative evolutionary roles of men and women. This is speculative, obviously. And because our research did indicate, it's tentative research so far, that the SJW sort of equality above all else philosophy is more prevalent among women. It's predicted by the personality factors that are more common among women. So agreeableness and high negative emotion. Primarily agreeableness. But in addition, it's also predicted by being female. And that's interesting because in most of the personality research that I've done, and as far as I know in the literature more broadly speaking, most of the time you can get rid of the attitudinal differences between men and women, or at least reduce them by controlling for personality. So if you take a feminine man and a masculine woman, then, the poles reverse. But that didn't seem to be the case with political correctness. And so I've been thinking about that a lot because, well, men are bailing out of the humanities like mad, and pretty much out of the universities except for STEM. The women are moving in like mad, and they're also moving into the political sphere like mad. And this is new, right? We've never had this happen before, and we do not know what the significance of it is. It's only 50 years old. And so we were thinking about this, and so I don't know what you think about this proposition, but imagine that historically speaking, it's something like women were responsible for distribution and men were responsible for production. Something like that. And maybe that's only the case really in the tight confines of the immediate family, but that doesn't matter because that's most of the evolutionary landscape for human beings anyways. What the women did was make sure that everybody got enough. Okay, and that seems to me to be one of the things that's driving, at least in part, the SJW demand for equity and equality. It's like, let's make sure everybody has enough. It's like, well, look, fair enough, I mean, you can't argue with that. But there's an antipathy between that and the reality of differential productivity, because people really do differ in their productivity. So, all right, so to answer your question fully, I do think that the rebellious tendency of adolescence is associated both with that criminality spike, especially among men, and with creativity. Yes. I think that the SJW phenomena is different, and I think it is associated, at least in part, with the rise of women to political power. And we don't know what women are like when they have political power, because they've never had it. I mean, there's been queens, obviously, and that sort of thing. There's been female authority figures, and females have wielded far more power historically than feminists generally like to admit. But this is a different thing. And we don't know what a truly female political philosophy would be like. But it might be, especially if it's not been well examined and it isn't very sophisticated conceptually. It could easily be, well, let's make sure things are distributed equally. Well, yeah, but sorry, that's just not going to fly.
Do you think in terms of the West or the SJWs, and you talked about last lecture as well, creating chaos when there is none, otherwise it'd be static, do you think there would be any validity in saying that in a country like Canada where we're pretty gender equal, is there any merit to thinking SJWs are trying to create chaos even when there arguably is none on a mass level? Obviously there's still problems.
Why would they do that?
Otherwise it would be static. And that drive, it wouldn't, but I'm just wondering.
I read this quote once, and I don't remember who said it. It might have been Robert Heinlein, for crying out loud, science fiction author. That springs to mind, but it probably wasn't. And the proposition was that men tested ideas and that women tested men. And I kind of like that. There's something about that, And now, obviously, it's an overgeneralization, but we also don't know to what degree women test men sheerly through provocation. It's a lot, because if you want to test someone, you don't have a little conversation with them. You poke the hell out of them and you say, okay, I'm going to go after you and see where your weak spots are. And it seems to me that in this constant protest and use of shame and all of that goes along with this sort of radical movement towards egalitarianism, that there's a tremendous amount of provocation. And God, I'm going to say this too, even though I shouldn't. But I don't believe this, but I'm trying to figure it out. I thought it was absolutely comical when 50 Shades of Grey came out. I just thought that was just so insanely comical that at the same time, there's this massive political demand for like radical equality and say with regards to sexual behavior, and the fastest selling novel the world had ever seen was S&M Domination, right? It's like, oh well, we know where the unconscious is going with that one, don't we? And sometimes I think, like, because one of the things that I've really tried to puzzle out, and it's not like I believe this, right? I'm just telling you where the edges of my thinking have been going, is that you have this crazy alliance between the feminists and the radical Islamists that I just do not get. It's like the feminists, it's like why they aren't protesting nonstop about Saudi Arabia is just completely beyond me. Like, I do not understand it in the least. And I wonder too, I just wonder bloody well, this is the Freud in me, is like, is there an attraction, is there an attraction that's emerging among the female radicals for that totalitarian male dominance that they've chased out of the West? And I mean, that's a hell of a thing to think, but after all, I am psychoanalytically minded, and I do think things like that. Because, like, I just can see no rational reason for it. The only other rational reason is that, well, the West needs to fall, and so the enemy of my enemy is...
My friend,
exactly. Now, what is it? I got that wrong, but...
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yes, exactly.
And that's why Islamists tend to vote liberal as well.
Yes, well, so that could be the case. But I'm not going to shake my suspicion about this unconscious balancing, because as the demand for egalitarianism and the eradication of masculinity accelerates, there's going to be a longing in the unconscious for the precise opposite of that, right? The more you scream for equality, the more your unconscious is going to admire dominance. And so, well, that's how you think if you're psychoanalytically minded. And, I'm a great admirer of Freud. He knew a hell of a lot more than people like to think. And so, which is partly why everyone still hates him, even though it's been 100 years since he's, really been around. So, all right, we should stop. That's actually why people get married, just so you know. Because this is built into marital vows. I'm not leaving, ever, no matter what. It's like, okay, well, that definitely puts a boundary around our arguments, right? Because I can't say every time you manifest one of your flaws, which you're likely to do just as often as me, well, enough of this. It's like, that's horrible, man. If your whole life is, well, every time you get out of line, I'm out of here. It's like, how the hell are you? First of all, you're not going to admit to ever doing anything wrong. Second, you're going to be on you're like a scared cat the entire relationship, because, well, who knows? It could just come to an end at any moment. It's like, people say, well, if the possibility of divorce is open, it makes you free. It's like, yeah, that's what you want. You want to be free, eh? Really? Really? So you can't predict anything. That's what you're after. It's a vow. And it says, look, I know that you're trouble. Me too. So we won't leave, no matter what happens. Well, that's a hell of a vow, but that's why it's a vow, right? That's why you take it in front of a bunch of people. That's why it's supposed to be a sacred act. It's like, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? Everything is mutable and changeable at any moment. Well, go ahead. You live your life like that and see what you're like when you're 50. Jesus, it's dismal. 2 or 3 divorces, your family's fragmented, you've got no continuity of narrative. And it's not good for the kids, not by any stretch of the imagination. And so it's a form of voluntary enslavement, I suppose, but it's also equivalent to the adoption of a responsibility. And there's more to it than that. If you can't run away, then you can solve your problems. Because it might be, okay, well, I'm stuck with you. So how about we fix things? Because the alternative is we're going to be in a boxing match for the next 40 years. That's the alternative. So, and you think you're going to fix problems without something like that hanging over your head? There isn't a chance. You'll just avoid them, because that's what people do. It's really hard to solve problems, especially in a relationship. We're having a fight and I find out that it's, because you were abused by your uncle when you were 5 or some goddamn thing. It's like, it's very frequent that sort of thing happens. There's your partner is manifesting some weird anomalous behavior. You just can't make heads or tails of it. It doesn't seem related to what you're doing at all. They don't want to talk about it. And so as soon as you bring it up, they get mad. And then you bring it up again, they even get madder, and they tell you that you're not going to talk about that or they're going to leave. And so maybe you're really, really persistent because you're kind of a son of a bitch, and then they break down and cry, you know, and then they have this horrible memory that comes flooding forward that's completely, you don't know what to do with it, and then you have to sort it out. It's like, you think you're going to do that unless there's a good reason? You have to know, we better sort this out, or we're going to be carrying it around for the next 40 years. That maybe is enough motivation so you'll actually try hard to solve a problem. It's a lot easier to say, well, sorry, we're not going there. But then, good, you'll have it every day, every goddamn day for the rest of your life.